The Buddhist concept sunyata, emptiness, is one of the most misunderstood and mistranslated words from Sanskrit into other languages. But what really does sunyata mean? Now I want to explain to you the subtlety of what sunyata means and its profound implication into what our Buddha nature truly is. Now, this is explored to its nth degree within the secret teachings of DZOGCHEN, which are the highest teachings within Buddhism. So you find these within the DZOGCHEN teachings. And if you want to learn more about the DZOGCHEN teachings, I highly recommend you head over and watch my comprehensive video on what DZOGCHEN actually is. But in this video, we're going to pinpoint into what sunyata actually is, which actually makes up a core aspect and a core teaching within all of Buddhism. But we need to understand this correctly, because a lot of people hear the word sunyata and they think that it just means empty or emptiness, that the mind is empty, that objects are empty of anything, and so forth and so on. But this is not actually true. First, we have to admit, who knows of the emptiness, right? Because if it was just purely empty of its nature and everything is empty, the mind is completely empty and so forth and so on, what is this awareness of this emptiness? Is it just purely empty, as a lot of people incorrectly assume, or is there more to it? These are the questions we need to ask. And what happens because we don't address such questions is a lot of people believe Buddhism is some sort of nihilistic philosophy or teaching. And this again is an incorrect understanding, because we're not understanding sunyata to its nth degree. We're understanding it just as pure empty and, let's say, emptiness, without really understanding what emptiness actually means, what that word implies. But so this just leads people into believing that Buddhism is some sort of nihilistic philosophy, which it isn't, because we're misunderstanding the word sunyata. And as I said, if it's empty, how is there an awareness of the emptiness itself? Because there wouldn't even be an awareness, right? And this leads into a really interesting way of explaining this from one of my own personal greatest teachers, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, in the Dzogchen lineage. And one of his teachings is called the iron rod technique. Now, this iron rod technique is explained in one of his great books, As It Is, Volume 2, where there's a dialogue between him and a student. So let me read to you this Q&A between Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche's student and himself. The student says, "When I recognize rigpa, all thinking dissolves, but the appearances of sights, sounds, and so on do not disappear. What is the difference between experience and thought?" Rinpoche replies, "There is no need to block experience. Simply avoid fixating on the experience and labeling it. It is very hard to avoid experiencing. In fact, if you really want to avoid experiencing, you'll need to have someone knock you out with an iron bar. If you want to totally stop encountering anything and experience no mind, perceive no experiences, have your friend give you a hard whack over the head. Then you will succeed, at least for a while. When both thinking and perception cease, there is the state we call utter oblivion, which is mindless and without thought. That state resembles the original cause of ignorance. When both the thinking and the perceived are halted, your samsaric state is only put on pause, on hold. The true way is to be untainted by the experiencing mind and unspoiled by fixating on the perceived objects. But that doesn't mean that the wakefulness is somehow interrupted, not at all. If your training is for the purpose of bringing thinking and experience to a halt, you must have somebody knock you out. If you prefer, you could also do it by yourself. You don't need to have somebody else knock you out. Every time you wake up, take hold of the iron bar, if that's your training, and knock yourself out. You could get quite good at it after a while. This is quite easy to accomplish. As soon as you regain your senses and start to have one thought, immediately hit yourself in the head. Your meditation aid would be the iron bar. If you want to bring both sensations and thoughts to a halt, use the iron bar. This will help you to reach the ultimate stupidity. This was the pointing out instruction for the stupid state of complete oblivion. Obviously, Tulku is being extremely sarcastic here in his reply to the student, but he has to be to try and snap the student out of it, right? To bring them back to their senses. That if you want to stop experiencing and halt reality altogether and enter into utter oblivion, which he states is complete ignorance, then you'll need the iron bar technique, right? Just to keep knocking yourself out. So obviously he's not suggesting you do that. I'm not suggesting you do that, and it's completely idiotic if you do. But the student's problem here comes from when he says, when I recognize rigpa, right? And so what does rigpa mean? Rigpa means total complete awareness or pure presence, total presence, right? It actually literally means knowledge. It means like the complete knowing of the ultimate reality. In Dzogchen Buddhism, that would be called Dhammadhatu, which is kind of like this field of reality, this ultimate reality, which is analogous with kind of space, in a sense, where space is eternal but contains the entire universe. And so rigpa can be related to, let's say, vidya in Sanskrit, meaning knowledge. Also gnosis that we find in Hermeticism and Gnosticism, and also jnana that we find in Sanskrit as well, right? These words are kind of implying that there's this total awareness or presence of this ultimate reality, which actually that you become. You become this complete presence of this reality. And from the Dzogchen perspective, sunyata is the essence of that, right? This emptiness is the essence of that. That's what the rigpa recognizes and becomes stable in, right? Because rigpa itself means having a recognition and also a stability in that state. So it's not just a recognition, right? Because that would just mean that you recognize it, but you don't abide in it. So rigpa itself is having the recognition and the stability in that. And the essence of what that is sunyata, right? Is this emptiness. But what is this emptiness? As Tulku implied in his reply about the iron rod technique, if you're just going to completely knock yourself clean out all the time to go into this utter oblivion where there's not a sense of a knowing or an awareness there, that's really not what we're talking about, right? When we're talking about sunyata, that's complete vacancy, right? Like there's just no one there at all. So what he's skillfully articulating to us through this transmission is that though the reality is empty, there's a knowing or a cognizant quality, an awareness that knows the emptiness. It's not just empty. It's not just purely empty. There is something there. And that something there is the cognizant quality. And so that's why this is not nihilistic in and of itself. It's a misinterpretation. Tulku is explaining here that there is something more subtle about sunyata, something more profound that we haven't thought about. And it's because we're not thinking about the word emptiness in its proper context, because we don't have a lot of information. We may hear the word emptiness and think that it means empty and that there is nothing else, right? And this becomes a big problem, as I mentioned at the start, when we translate words from Sanskrit into other languages. We find a lot of these problems, right? And so when we look at this, what really is sunyata, right? And so I want to read to you a passage from volume 1 of As It Is by Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche to give you a thorough understanding of what we are speaking about when we're talking about sunyata. In the Prajnaparamita scriptures, you find the statements, outer things are emptiness, inner things are emptiness, emptiness is emptiness, the vast is emptiness, the ultimate is emptiness, the conditioned is emptiness, the unconditioned is emptiness. Emptiness here should be understood as empty cognizance. Please understand this. The suffix "ness" implies the cognizant quality. We need to understand this word in its correct connotation. Otherwise, it sounds too nihilistic to simply say that outer things are empty. If we understand emptiness as empty or void, rather than empty cognizance, we are leaning too much towards nihilism, the idea that everything is a big blank void. This is a serious sidetrack. The Buddha initially taught that all things are empty. This was unavoidable. Indeed, it was justifiable because we need to dismantle our fixation on the permanence of what we experience. A normal person clings to the contents of his experiences as solid, as being that, not just as mere experience, but as something which has solidity, which is real, which is concrete and permanent. But if we look honestly and closely at what happens, experience is simply experience, and it is not made out of anything whatsoever. It has no form, no sound, no color, no taste, and no texture. It is simply experience, an empty cognizance. This interpretation changes the whole game and changes our complete understanding of what emptiness means. So sunyata is not just empty, but it's empty cognizance. Do you remember what I was alluding to earlier? Where there's a knowing or an awareness, a cognizant quality that knows that there's an emptiness, right? It's not just that there's emptiness, because if it was just emptiness itself, then we'd all be following the iron rod technique, right? But it's not that. There's emptiness, but then there is this cognizant quality. Now, this understanding leads into a deeper understanding of what our Buddha nature is, right? So shunyata is basically our Buddha nature, but our Buddha nature is threefold. Now, this is the concept of the trikayas that we find in Buddhism, right? Where you have Dhammakaya, essence, and you have Sambhogakaya, our nature, and then you have Nirmanakaya, which is the unconfined capacity. So what you see here is you see the first two kayas, Dhammakaya being our essence, and Sambhogakaya being the cognizant quality, right? So Dhammakaya is empty. Sambhogakaya is the cognizant quality. And Nirmanakaya is the unity of both. Actually, they're indivisible, right? There is no separation between them. And that's the understanding. That's where you have the stability in rigpa, where you begin to understand that there was not a separation between being empty and having the cognizant quality, right? And these trikayas are what the Buddha nature is. And Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, in As It Is Volume 2, he explains Buddha nature as the trikayas in relation to shunyata, in relation to the empty cognizance. And he uses this wonderful analogy of space and the sun. Now let me read to you this beautiful quote for you. Buddha nature is the identity of the three kayas of the awakened state. The three kayas are Dhammakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. They are also called the three Vajras, Vajra body, Vajra speech, and Vajra mind. It is taught that the empty essence is Dhammakaya, the cognizant nature is Sambhogakaya, and the unity of the two, the unconfined capacity, is Nirmanakaya. The essence of mind is primordially empty. This is exactly what we call Dhammakaya. If you want to use an example, this emptiness is like space. Space is not something that you can see, hear, smell, taste, touch, or think of in terms of an entity that is pleasant or unpleasant. Space here is an analogy, not the actual literal meaning. When the Buddha said, no form, no smell, no taste, no sound, no texture, no mental object, that describes how our mind is. In the true words of the Buddha, our mind has no form to be seen, and no sound, no smell, no taste, and no texture to be experienced, nor is it a mental object. The essence of mind is primordially empty and rootless. Therefore the Buddha said, realize the emptiness of your mind. To realize emptiness means to understand and see in actuality that our mind is empty, groundless, and rootless. That is its essence, its identity. But what is its nature? It is an ability to know. In the case of a Buddha, that knowing is called omniscient wisdom. Right now, at this very moment, don't we have the capacity to know and experience? In this world, there is only one thing that can know, experience, and comprehend, and that is the mind of a sentient being. Nothing else can do this. In short, the Buddha taught that we should realize the meaning of emptiness. To reiterate, the empty quality is free. It is primordially empty, rootless. The analogy used is space, because space cannot be created. Space is not our doing. Sunlight is the metaphor for the cognizant quality. There is also no one who makes the sunshine. It is spontaneously and naturally present. Space and the sun are forever inseparable. The sun can never go to some place outside of space. The meaning to which this analogy points within us is that our essence is empty and by nature it is cognizant. The capacity of this is the unity of being empty and cognizant. So I love that last analogy that Tulku mentioned, where we have the sun and space that are inseparable, right? They are both unified in this spontaneously present reality, right? And this is a good analogy for how we understand empty cognizance, sunyata, right? It's understanding that our essence is dhammakaya, is the space, right? And our nature is the sun, is the cognizant quality, sambhogakaya. And the unity of both is nirmanakaya, right? It's the unconfined capacity. And so there's not a separation there. There's not a separation. They are fundamentally one. And this is where we get into a lot of problems when we start to misinterpret sunyata. We think it's just empty, but then people say, yeah, but there's actually an awareness of the emptiness. What do I do with this awareness? And it's like, the awareness is your nature. The knowing capacity, the cognizant quality is your nature. That's what makes a sentient being a sentient being. It's not anything negative. It's a unity with the emptiness of the mind. And that's why in Buddhism, they often state that the mind is empty, spontaneous, and free, right? It's not confined, but it's not just empty. It's also spontaneous and it's free. And this is where both are unified, Dhammakaya and Sambhogakaya, and that unity is Nirmanakaya. And this is actually what sunyata is. And a lot of people don't think about sunyata in this complex way, but we need to understand it in this way because this is actually what it is. Sunyata being our Buddha nature, but our Buddha nature is the three kayas. It's Dhammakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. These are the hidden teachings of Dzogchen. These are the hidden teachings of Vajrayana Buddhism. And we find this also in Mahayana Buddhism, right? But a lot of people just don't think about it in its proper context. But that's what sunyata is. Sunyata isn't just complete, utter void and nothingness, which leads into an incorrect nihilistic perspective of the world. Sunyata actually contains everything, but there's a knowing that sunyata contains everything. There's an awareness that that essence of being empty is actually unified with the knower, with the one who is aware. Now that is Sambhogakaya, that is you. And the unity of that understanding is Nirmanakaya. And that is what sunyata actually is. So I hope you all enjoyed coming to a deeper understanding of what sunyata is and understanding a little bit more about what the three kayas are as well. And please leave a comment below and let me know if you've ever heard of this interpretation before, because this is some of the deeper aspects of the secret teachings of Dzogchen that we find in Vajrayana Buddhism that were isolated to a lot of the great Dzogchen masters just a few hundred years ago, but they are much more in the public sphere now as I am explaining these teachings to you. So please leave a comment below. I hope you are all safe and sound, and I'll see you in the next one. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.